Improving stalking laws is central to Just Stalking Resources' mission. Executive Director Turquoise Williams and other experts joined Maryland Delegate Emily Shetty speaking in favor of House Bill 743, Protective Orders, Crimes of Violence and Stalking.
My name is Delegate Emily Shetty. I'm here to testify in support of HB 745, a bill that would allow victims of non-intimate partner stalking to obtain added protections from their stalker and a path towards a permanent protective order. So if you're in the 40% of stalking victims with a current or prior intimate relationship with your stalker, you are afforded a lengthier order, the ability to have firearms removed from dangerous stalkers, and a path towards a permanent protective order. But if you are in the 60% of victims without a past relationship, you don't get any of that. In fact, you have to pay $86 every 6 months, are forced to face your stalker in court, and have no way to seek the removal of firearms from a potentially violent person. What HB 745 does, as introduced, is it tries to address some of these injustices by adding stalking to the list of offenses that an individual might petition for a protective order, and also by providing a path for victims of non-intimate partner stalking to obtain a permanent protective order. So I want to share a little bit. We spoke with all of the advocates who are interested in this in the IPV community and outside of it. And lots of concerns were raised about the bill as drafted. So I'm working with the entire community, folks here at the table, and I think some others as well, on a sponsor amendment that would seek to do the same 3 goals, but via the peace order statute. So what it would still do under the peace order is it would allow for a non-IPV victim to seek a peace order, but for a lengthier period of time, allow discretion for the removal of firearms, and allow a path towards a permanent order under certain circumstances. So, so under both bills, or both the bill and the sponsor amendment we're planning to share shortly, we would have those goals achieved. Under the bills introduced, it would be under the protective order statute, adding a class of victims that are not currently eligible. Under the sponsor amendment, it would not alter the structure we have currently in the courts of IPV and non-IPV victims, but instead allow for those longer protections, more robust protections to exist for stalking victims. So with that, I urge a favorable report of House Bill 745 and really appreciate the committee's consideration. Turquoise, why don't you go next? Okay. I'll give you the microphone. Oh, you got it. That'd be good.
Thank you. Chair Clippinger, Vice Chair Bartlett, and members of the House Judiciary Committee, thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony regarding House Bill 745 to expand protections to victims of stalking. My name is Turquoise Williams. I'm testifying in my capacity as Executive Director of Just Stalking Maryland Resources and a stalking victim for over 15 years. Peace orders don't work in my experience. Getting them served can be nearly impossible. In my case, requiring me to once use myself as bait and necessitating interventions from a friend 4 states away on another occasion. Orders were ignored, even when standing less than 3 feet from my stalker. Police still did not remove or violate them, returning their gifts or evidence, asking them to leave, saying there was nothing more they could do. This person never went to prison for their stalking or harassment. The arbitrary argument that persistent stalking victims should be bifurcated from neighborhood disputes or other types of victims, such as domestic violence or sexual assault victims, is not grounded in the research regarding this matter. I have never had a sexual relationship with my stalker. We had no intimate history, nor has this person ever attempted to sexually assault or rape me. Stalking is a more varied crime than many understand, yet not always dangerous in the classic sense, such as physical violence. It affects all genders, ethnic, and racial groups. Research suggests that professional and male identifying victims are equally targeted by stalkers. I respectfully request a favorable report on HB 745. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Chair Clippinger, Madam Vice Chair. My name is Debbie Feinstein. I'm Chief of the Special Victims Division for the Montgomery County State's Attorney's Office. You've heard me talk about concerns around stalking before, so I just want to remind everyone about the scary statistics that are related to stalking. 1 in 3 women are victims of stalking in their lifetime, and 1 in 6 men are experience stalking in their lifetime. There's a high relationship between homicide and stalking. 76% of female homicide victims had been stalked previously. 54% of female homicide victims reported stalking to the police before they were killed. 40% of victims of stalking are victims, and I think that Delegate Shetty touched on this. 40% are victimized by current or former intimate partners, 42% by an acquaintance. So the concern here is, why are we giving different protections when the lethal behavior is the same? It is identical in stalking cases, IPV, non-IPV, in terms of the nexus to homicide, in terms of the concern about safety. And you heard what Ms. Williams testified to in terms of her own experience. Stalking has dramatic effects on the victims. They suffer much higher rates of depression, anxiety, insomnia, social dysfunction than other people in the general population. And the statistics that I'm giving you are from a 2022 national study. So why are we here? We're here to try to enhance the protections for victims of stalking. We see these cases in my office, not regularly, but often enough. And the cases that we do see come into our district court because stalking is a misdemeanor, and that's the way we see them come in. We often bring them to our circuit court to handle them with more special attention. Again, why? Because they're so serious and they can be lethal. That's why this bill is important, whether it's in the peace order or whether it's in the protective order. There should be more protections of stalking. I urge your support.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. Melanie Shapiro with the Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence. I'd like to thank Delegate Shetty for her openness and willingness to work with us regarding the concerns with having some of this language contained in the protective order versus the peace order. Just to explain a little bit of that, the rationale behind that is that the protective order is intentionally very narrow because the protections offered are very broad. And so to put some of these protections in the protective order versus the peace order was very concerning. By some of the people that just testified before you raised those concerns. However, stalking is a tremendous issue. It's present in intimate partner situations, in dating situations, people who know each other from work, or people who have no idea who the other person even is. And so the opportunity to get the relief that this bill is proposing through a peace order is incredibly important. It also could benefit victims of dating violence who don't meet the requirements of the protective order because they don't have that relationship level yet, but the stalking might still be going on. And we see that as well. The path to a permanent protective order and peace order are both equally important. When Delegate Shetty first brought this bill, I decided to see what other states are doing. And there are 37 states that address stalking through some type of civil order. And I looked at every single one of their statutes, and Maryland is really out of step with the rest of the country in terms of the limited nature of the protections that are offered. So the discretionary removal of firearms, the additional duration, and the path to permanency are all consistent with what other states around our country are doing. And it's something that we think that Maryland should do as well. So we urge a favorable report on House Bill 745.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. I'm Lisa Jordan with the Maryland Coalition Against Sexual Assault. We're here in support of House Bill 745 with amendments. You know, protective orders right now, they're the first line of defense for intimate partner violence cases, but not only for intimate partner violence cases. They're also available for non-intimate partner sexual assault cases, child abuse cases, elder abuse cases. Sexual assault, the non-intimate partner sexual assault cases moved from the peace order to the protective order several years ago because the orders are longer, they're generally taken more seriously, and there are other forms of relief that flow from the protective order, not the peace order, like the 2-year order and the permanent order. As introduced, House Bill 745 does two things. It moves stalking kind of the same way we moved sexual assault. And honestly, we viewed this as kind of reasonable. The Office of Violence Against Women at the U.S. Department of Justice kind of views sexual assault, domestic violence, stalking together. They're all power-based. So that's a reasonable option. We haven't seen the amendment. That's, I think, still in the works. We're certainly happy to look at that as well, if that is the better option. The second really important thing this bill does is it expands the availability of permanent protective orders. As introduced, I think it inadvertently referred to crimes of violence in the criminal law article. We don't want to eliminate protection for assault survivors, so we really should use the public safety article. The bill is a little bit up in the air because of these ongoing discussions. MCASA's primary concerns are increasing protection for victims of stalking, expanding the availability of permanent protective orders, and avoiding a separate process just for stalking victims. It's simply impracticable. For those reasons, we urge a favorable report of House Bill 745 with amendments.
Questions for the panel? Delegate Card.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all very much for coming on this very compelling legislation. This is either, I think, for either the bookend attorneys on either side might be able to help me with this question. So I have a client who's being harassed and tormented by her neighbor, her former neighbor. She moved because she couldn't deal with it anymore. There's no sexual nature to the harassment, but every time she comes, she's trying to sell her house, happens to be in Baltimore City. And every time her husband, who also is part of this peace order that they got, goes there, he winds up being followed by this guy around. It sounds like there could be stalking. The peace order expired coincidentally on Monday, and there's now no protections. The question is, should it only be for non-intimate partner stalking, or should this potential expansion to a year, which I love, should that be for all either stalking or harassment or tormenting that could end in bodily harm?
So the protective order already includes stalking if you fall under kind of the intimate partner category. But for that, and that's really what we're looking at, is what do we do with the non-intimate
But this is only for stalking. I'm saying that what about for somebody who's being harassed, tormented? Would this also include them?
So if stalking is specifically delineated as something that's going to be enhanced in the peace order, so to go to a year to allow for the discretionary removal of firearms, then technically harassment is a different definition than stalking does. Often it overlaps though. Actually, harassment's harder to prove than stalking, even though it is a 90-day offense versus a 5-year offense, which is what stalking is. So some of the conduct might be captured, but they are two different things. And this discussion contemplates stalking because we're kind of starting there because of the high nexus to lethality to say, look, some of these things that happen under peace orders are significant and require more protection. One of the other issues with peace order is that you can only get a peace order if something's happened in the last 30 days. So you're basically stuck after 6 months, and then you have to wait until something else bad happens, versus the ability to get a longer period for the peace order and have a path to a permanent peace order. And, I would add, based on some of the things that we just heard in terms of needing to move, with your example, them moving from that area, I have another statistic that 1 in 7 people move as a result of stalking victimization. So it's a high cost to victims, emotionally, physically, and financially.
Way there was an ERPO to remove this person's the harasser's firearms, but then they had to give it back because there was no reason to keep them.
Yeah, that's a whole different issue for another bill someday that we've been thinking about, but I hear you.
Let's talk. Okay,
sounds great.
But the fact was that also promoted her having to move, which cost tens of thousands of dollars, and she hasn't been able to sell her house because the interest rates, she moved right after the interest rates went up. I mean, so this is just, if they would have gotten the 1-year peace order, maybe things would have been different.
Delegate, Ms. Williams would like to offer some additional comment on your first question, I believe.
I think we should just kind of clarify, as I mentioned, for acquaintance stalking, it's actually really low probability of violence. If I remember correctly, based on the things I've been reading to brush up on this, it's about either 5. I always invert the numbers, but it's either 5.4 or 4.5% likelihood of violence. The violence for acquaintance stalking is relatively low. right? It's the persistence that you have to be concerned about. The persistence for acquaintance stalking can go on for, I think the longest that I've ever heard is 83 or 84 years, right? I've heard studies where it talks about like 40 years. Mine so far has been 15, but I altogether expect this person to come back like he's done every time. They usually do. Acquaintance stalkers persist statistically more likely. It's about 40%, I believe. I didn't bring that data with me, but I believe it's in my written report. But you know, the lethality it's much lower. But that's why I'm saying in terms of this specifically, what we're talking about for this, everybody should have the same length of a piece of protective order, whatever you want to call it. I'm personally not interested in what we're calling it.
Seeing none, thank you very much. That concludes the testimony on House Bill 745.
To support this legislation, call your Maryland State Senator and District Delegates to endorse House Bill 745 and Senate Bill 743 with amendment. You can learn more about this process on juststalkingmdresources.org under Advocacy. To watch me and other experts testify regarding similar legislation being considered by the state Senate, click the video on the left. To watch more from Maryland Delegate Emily Shetty from our launch party, click the video on the right. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Please stay safe.